Welcome to the Shift Happens podcast, where we explore the latest trends transforming the future of work. Today's guest is someone whose story sounds like a movie, because part of it almost were. We're joined by Greg Vandergast, cybersecurity leader and founder of Sequoia Consulting. Greg's cybersecurity journey began with teenage curiosity that led him to hack a nuclear research facility. That pivotal moment drew U.S. federal attention and launched his career in intelligence. Since then, he's spent decades as a CISO, auditor, consultant, and advisor, helping organizations rethink security from the ground up. In this episode, Greg challenges the industry's long-standing assumptions on security, explaining why it's fundamentally a quality discipline, not a technology stack, why unstructured data exposes organizations in ways they rarely see, and how AI can help uncover the causes, not just the symptoms of modern cyber risk. Let's get started.
Shift Happens podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Shift Happens podcast. So excited today because we're going to talk to somebody popular in a good way, I would say. Greg, always good to see you.
Likewise, thanks for having me. Popular is not the word I would have chosen, but thank you.
Hey, good or bad publicity is publicity.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, Greg, before we jump right into our conversation, we always start with this podcast asking our guests what their soundtrack of shift is. In case you don't know what soundtrack of shift is, essentially what song best describe the change and transformation we're going through today, and why'd you pick that song?
So I went a little bit off script here because this was a challenging one for me. I picked "A Change Will Do You Good" by Sheryl Crow. Not so much because it describes a change, but I think especially in cybersecurity, we're due for a change. We really need one.
You know, I haven't heard that song in forever, and help me out here. I think in the first few paragraphs, there's a couple lines that says, "Bottom feeder, insincere, prophet, lo-fi pioneer, sell the house and go to school, pretty young girlfriend, daddy's jewel." That paragraph or that stanza or chorus, whatever, really struck me when this song came out because, you're talking about bottom feeder, the worst of the worst, but then prophet, which is looked up, lo-fi pioneer, there's a juxtaposition. Selling the house, going to school, it's kind of reverse. And pretty young girlfriend, daddy's jewel. I don't know what that means. But anyway.
That's a weird one. I remember it being very popular when I was like a teenager. I must have been like 15, 16 years old. I think it came out about, 96, something like that. So that would have been right. I don't actually remember the lyrics super well. I remember playing on, in Canada, we had Much Music, not MTV, but Much Music. Yeah. But I think, we'll get into that. I just kind of like this idea of the status quo and go and do something different. And does it make sense or not? And that's me pushed into a corner having to choose a song.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? Like oftentimes people talk about the glass half empty. Yeah, we're, in technology or society, one can say we're in this state of chaos right now, but it's through chaos we find opportunity, we find hope, we find new things that we can adapt to or do better, right? In speaking of that, okay, so for our guest, kind of let's go back to the beginning. Your claim to fame is you're a hacker. Hacker generally have a negative connotation, but certainly the work you've done led to a lot of good things. So today you're a cybersecurity leader, you're well-renowned, well-respected, companies, governments get advice from you. So can you share first of all, how you became a hacker, but how did those early experiences shape your current thinking, posture, philosophy today?
Sure. It's because earlier you were saying about, change and chaos. And I think I'm very much almost the other way, where we have a lot of chaos and we need to kind of settle things down a little bit. We need to firm up that foundation before we go much further. But that doesn't mean we get into it. Doesn't mean you can't use the new stuff to firm up the old stuff. The silly story is always that I was about, I think, 16 years old, and my sister brought home the film Hackers from blockbuster video, which is a film that features a guy learning to break into computers and then sleeping with Angelina Jolie. So obviously, it's worth exploring as the joke. But I think it's a little bit of a tongue in cheek thing, but it was one of the little factors. I was kind of a geeky teenager, and I did start researching stuff and reading books and going on Yahoo. Google didn't exist yet, right? That's how old we are. Look at all the gray. And yeah, a year and a bit later, I hacked into a nuclear weapons facility where they just set off 5 atomic bombs on the ground as part of these live tests and stole all the research data. And that wound up, we gave it to Wired magazine,
Was
and
it an American nuclear facility?
it was
Or?
not an American nuclear. Calm down, American friends. Um, it was not American. It was somewhere in Asia, shall we say. And that did get a lot of attention from a number of people, including the Americans, not Angelina Jolie, unfortunately. And then while I was living in the States on a somewhat expired student visa, some gentlemen from the Defense Department showed up, 4 of them, because they thought that I had breached this going through a military computer, but that wasn't actually true. So I wasn't too worried. I was like, I don't think I
So
violated
time out.
US.
So you did all this while you were in the US as a student?
No, I was actually living in Holland at the time, and only afterwards did I move to the US. So I was like, look, I've not, I was in Holland, that was in Asia somewhere. I've not violated any US laws. I thought, I was worried because I thought you guys were from immigration. That's when suit number 4 lifted his hand up and said, I'm from immigration. And they kind of hauled me away on that. And I spent 3 years in a sort of weird undercover function, being paid as a witness, basically. But like normally witnesses something and you pay them. I was sent out to go witness
You're a
stuff.
future witness.
Yeah, basically. And this was, a convenient way of getting around the fact that I couldn't be on payroll, that I couldn't get a security classification, I couldn't do any of these things formally. So we just very informally just kind of made me this witness, and literally federal agents paying you cash in underground car parks every month.
While on a student visa, I suppose.
No, at that point they had arranged for me to be on an indefinite humanitarian visa because of all the war and famine in Holland and Canada where I'm
Oh,
from.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, those terrible tulips. I got to,
Yeah, it's grueling. Yeah. At some point, I think I had a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was very vague, just authorized extra legal activities, which is fantastic for getting out of speeding tickets.
that's right. You,
Yeah.
immunity.
Yeah, pretty much. You know what? I did that for 3 years. But then what really shaped my thinking, and actually one of the very first things in hindsight from the hacking days is that this was before cybersecurity really. It was dial-up internet. You connected directly to these internet chat rooms with other hackers. Then they would try to hack you, and your computer was directly connected most of the time. They would find you. There was no network router. There was no home Wi-Fi network. None of that. So
So time out. This is like the age of like Telnet, Gopher, right?
yeah, yeah,
Archie. You remember
yeah.
those?
This is like mid late 90s. And so what you had to do was you had to build your system really well. You had to harden everything. You had to patch everything up. You had to remove all the services you didn't need. You had to limit your access, not run your stuff as with privileged access. Basically, really, really good kind of IT basics. Not the kind of flashy monitor, detect, respond, cybery stuff of today. Just really building stuff properly, and that I think always kind of stuck with me. And then after this, I kind of went back to just being a cybersecurity consultant, kind of a rock star, because obviously, hacker background, government work must be really good. But people were, this is early 2000s. People were like throwing money at cybersecurity, and we had a lot of budget, and we get to buy a lot of tools. But I really started questioning of, okay, we've implemented these IDSs and these firewalls and this database encryption, but do we even know what we're protecting, what the value is? Like, have we documented this stuff properly? Do we have good processes around it? And the answer, to be honest, was usually no. And was this actually helping security? And we didn't really know. And the other thing that I noticed was, so that was kind of the first part. And I think a lot of people were very tech focused and thought it was very cool, but are we providing business value? And the other major thing that I noticed back then was that most of the work we're doing is because of poor practices somewhere else. It's because of something hasn't built well, or the life cycle hadn't been thought through, and now it's 10 years later and it's unmanageable, and all these other things. So like, well, why don't we fix all these IT issues instead of having, a whole team respond to incidents from these things being exploited or data being leaked out and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of taken me down this path where I'm now, I would say, a complete renegade in the cybersecurity industry. I don't apply most of the practices from the cybersecurity industry. I started a consultancy a couple of years ago because I did, this consulting, and then I was an auditor for a law firm that represented cyber insurance companies. It was my job to show that companies were negligent after being breached. 100% success rate as to not get paid out by the insurance, right? 100% success rate. I never made it to lunchtime the first day. It's always a huge disconnect between security and the business. Chief technologist for CDW, few CISO roles. Interestingly, my CISO role is always created by a CFO or CEO. Never like the technical CISO role. I was never accepted for an existing CISO role because they always looked at, well, what do you want to do? What's your skills? How much budget and team size have you met? It's like, you don't need 20 million. You could do this for 5. You don't need a team of 25. You could do it with like 6 people. You just need the right structure to implement the change where the issues are occurring rather than this big team of firefighters. And that's just not how most of those roles are defined. And then, yeah, a couple of years ago, I started something I call Sequoia Consulting, and it's basically, what I want everyone to do is start thinking about security differently. Security nowadays, the status quo is very much ramping up how much risk mitigation we're doing. Whereas we should be looking at how we operate as a business, our IT processes, and make sure that those processes have as few risks as possible. So achieve what we need to achieve while introducing as little risk as possible, having as few issues as possible. And what I've come to realize is that other industries, not in cybersecurity, but other industries have been doing this for decades. Aviation, manufacturing, automotive, oil and gas, shipping, healthcare. They apply things like Six Sigma, lean thinking. And they have this curve where the number of issues just kind of dramatically goes down and tapers down to some residual stuff. Ours is the other way. We're just in this arms race that we cannot keep up, and things are just getting worse and worse and worse. And to really start applying those quality management principles, to stop looking at security as a risk thing, and look at it as a quality thing. Because if you build high quality processes, systems, you're not going to have these defects. Security vulnerabilities are defects in code, defects in configuration, build, lifecycle management, an interface that causes users to make mistakes. These are all quality defects. So look at it that way, and you really start making a difference. You get fewer and fewer things that can be exploited, and you tend to improve the process and streamline the business at the same time.
Well, this is the crux of the conversation, right? What you just described, and you talk about look at other industries. Have you read the book Checklist Manifesto? Okay, really good book. You should get that book. So it's written by a surgeon general. His name is Atul Gawande. And long story short, he was an ER surgeon. And at one point he realized, how come there's still a high rate of people dying coming to the ER, right? And he's like, we need to do better. We need to do better. So he started looking at other industries that are similar, high profile, very intense, lives are at stake kind of thing. So he caught into aviation, commercial flights. So he looked at commercial flights, what are the rate of death? There's still crashes and whatnot, but it's actually very low. So he dug in. He's like, why is that? Why is that? So long story short, he found out that any operations, any flight that takes off has checklists for every single thing. Looking into, from the moment how you clean the plane, you open the door, and everyone involved in it, be it the pilot, the flight attendant, the person on the gate, everyone has a checklist. And this became a standard operating procedure for the airline industry. And the whole idea there is we can't be too safe. We got to do this every single time. So now he went back to ER and said, yeah, we have all these smart people, because his first question was, we have all these smart people, doctors, nurses, hospitals, and yet there's still a lot of people dying in the ER. So where he had control, the ER he led, I forgot which hospital, he started doing this. Like every single person has to have a checklist from the security guard on the door coming in the ER, the nurses, everything has to go through a checklist. And boy, 6 months after implementing that, the death rate went down. But your point remind me of this because you think about cybersecurity or IT security in general these days, right? Sure, there's a lot of tools out there and technologies. We just talked about AI, how it can help us. But sometimes, right, we keep buying, building, but then there's a hole that water keeps coming in on our boat that we're not plugging. We're not looking at the root cause.
Yeah, exactly. I use the I like this. I'm gonna look. I wrote it up. I'm gonna look up this book because I remember there was another one also to do with operate or like emergency rooms. And what they basically did, they noticed that communication, because you get like 12 people around the patient doing surgery sometimes. They noticed the communication caused issues and actually went to talk to Formula One teams to see how they do it, to orchestrate and choreograph all those things. That was quite an interesting one. But yeah, I use this boat analogy quite often. Cybersecurity nowadays is a bit like the bilge pump. All these threats are pushing on the boat, and some of them are always going to get in, and the bilge pump is there to process these things and get rid of. But the reality is, there's gaps all over this hull, and we're completely ignoring that. It's like, oh, buy more bilge pumps, buy more bilge pumps. But we need to address those things. And a lot of people think I kind of slag off security tools, but very often it's actually the security tool that shows you where the hole is. But rather than using that information to fix the hole, we just spend all our time pumping the water out, but we never actually get to fixing the hole. And I see vulnerability scans all the time with these companies having thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities, and oh yeah, and we prioritize them. We deal with most of the critical ones, and I ask them a simple question: where are they coming from? And they've only been grouping them by severity, not by cause or origin. And then you realize, actually, a third of these are your engineering department, and some of these, the host names are weird. Why is that Shadow IT? Why are they not being named the same? And well, you got a lot of third-party patching of these applications going on. Is that not part of your patching process? And how come this hasn't been updated? So, okay, engineering practices, procurement, lifecycle management, and you solve 3 or 4 IT business process issues, and the next year they don't have 10,000, they've got 5,000, and it's the start of that downward curve. And then you look at next, and people are not doing a whole lot of that. And I think if I can take this over to AvePoint, because I thought, we spent a few days together back in end of September, beginning of November. And for me, it was very eye-opening because I try to do things very, very holistically. I have something I call the fish tank principle to highlight this, because people think that security is a functional thing almost. I think I'm going to buy that tool and that's going to make me secure, or at least this part secure. But it doesn't work that way. And the analogy is basically, I call it the fish tank principle because it's like you order a pane of glass, it's a meter wide, or it's supposed to be a meter wide, and it arrives and it's 99 centimeters. I want to make a coffee table out of it. Put some legs on, put it down. It's perfectly functional. I put my coffee on it, my magazines, my plate. Friends come over. If we have loads of cups on it and there's not enough space, I can always just get another 99 centimeter coffee table, and it's perfectly functional and overflow onto that. If I need the same pane of glass for the bottom of my fish tank, I don't get to keep 99% of the water. The outcome is 0 from a security perspective, and that's very, very important, and you see it a lot. I've been doing some work in the identity space. A lot of people get PAM, for example, but they're only looking at privileged accounts. But then they're only looking at privileged accounts from like an IT person's perspective. So not the normal account in Salesforce that's got millions of contents in it, right? And then they don't manage the rest of the accounts because, well, they're not privileged. It's like, yeah, but your patching isn't 100%. So all of those accounts can be escalated. Now you've got newly privileged accounts that you're not including. So if you only do one thing, you're going to miss everything else. And even if you do everything you can in terms of identity, if your patching isn't up to speed, then all of your identity can be bypassed. And even if that's working fine, but you're running your infrastructure on an outdated hypervisor, that's not being updated anymore. So someone can take over that, bypass everything. And I thought, the unstructured data, the main thing you guys do, I thought that was really, really interesting because there's so many organizations. Look, we're not even good at this, but organizations focus on, the file permissions and the folders and
Correct. The databases, the ERPs. Yeah.
but then you've got copies of this data sitting on your 365 and your Exchange server all over the place
Your chats.
have the same thing. And it's that same thing. It's like the water will just find a crack and bypass it. You're creating other, copies of the data. A breach isn't just, oh yeah, someone broke into my network and made it through all these barriers and ended up in the database in the production environment, whatever. It's
They don't even end up there. They
yeah,
just
it's whoever gets access to your data. The result is the same. Oh yeah, they got your customer's IP because it was in an insecure Teams chat repository. And I thought that was really fascinating. That's an area that I hadn't really been covering as well. I really don't think that many people think about it, and I
no,
think it's
and
really
that's the
important.
key. In all the customers I work with, right? And today, there's research from Gartner and Forrester. They would say now between 70 to 80% of business critical data sits in unstructured data. Your Word documents, your Excel files, because if you look at the population of organizations, it's really the business users, and business users don't work on databases all day long. They work on Word documents and PowerPoints and chats and emails. And a lot of cybersecurity or frankly technical security professionals don't look at that. They look at, yeah, endpoints, identity, databases. Sure, that's important, your clouds, but then your gold mine is nobody's paying attention to it, right? Your your crown jewels, right?
Your users will actually aggregate of all the data in your environment, your users will probably aggregate the most valuable, sensitive part of your data, like your most sensitive data, and that's what they'll be moving onto these places specifically.
Well, to your point, right? That's how we think about it too, right? You think about going back to the source, the business. So one area as we work with customers, we talk about, okay, not all data is the same. Obviously, HR data and finance data, we need to protect those more compared to some, I don't know, holiday party planning document, right? But you look at your business and consider, okay, what are the critical things? What are the crown jewels? What are the workloads we need to protect? And then based on that, then we invest accordingly. We train people accordingly. That's the other part, right? Like, like training is never enough. Fine, we buy all these crazy expensive tools, but then we're not educating our folks on what a good practice is around security. Don't click that link when you get that email, right? Or the CEO will never WhatsApp you asking you for a gift card.
Yeah. I think that the process, like what I was saying before with the vulnerabilities, people just firefight these vulnerabilities, but they never ask where are they coming from? What's actually generating vulnerabilities? And I think it's the same with that. Like you could use, and I think I've been very kind of people talk about AI like we have to do AI. It's like I think of AI as like extra resource. It's like virtual people that can do intelligent things, but you have to have a job for them to do, right?
Right. Or interns for that matter right now, right?
And I think, this is like, because I remember like, data leakage protection a few years ago, and it was like, it'll scan your environment, but it's looking for, social security numbers, credit card numbers, but by trying to match patterns and regex and stuff. And now you can have AI and it can be written, in letters. The number can be written out in letters, in document, but the AI will see that, will understand that, will get the context or the header of the letter to know, oh, this is actually related to that deal. This is actually important. This is it can read one document and figure out, oh, this should actually be covered by the NDA that's mentioned in the other contract, and figure all these things out. So that's fantastic for finding that. Um, but then what people aren't doing, and they can do this with your solution as well, is, hey, we found a lot of sensitive information on this file share, in this email, in this, in 365, whatever. How did it get there? And you can do that to actually improve. You can use what it finds to go and improve your business processes. Oh yeah, you know what? When we do this Teams collaborations, we share data this way. That's probably not very, very good. Let's change the process, and then you don't have that issue anymore. And then you can use your solution to find your next kind of unstructured data challenge, and keep improving the process more and more. And then you get that downward curve of choose to go wrong.
So we know this for a fact. Certainly that's what we tell our customers too, right? But how many organizations are truly doing that? Because it's a big mindset shift. Like Let's go find the source. Let's go figure how can we do better? Maybe we should stop doing that. So with the organizations you advise and work with around the shift around, think about doing business securely. What's the success rate look like? Like,
Right. I say like do more business securely, less cybersecurity, right? Because if you do the stuff, if you have a waterproof hull, you don't need all these bilge pumps. And it's kind of weird because again, this kind of thinking is used in every other mature industry outside of cybersecurity, and it works really, really well in cybersecurity as well. But we just don't do it. And I think part of the problem is cybersecurity is seen as a technology issue, but it's not fundamentally a technology. We use technology for HR, we use technology for finance, we use technology for manufacturing. It's not necessarily a technology thing. Technology is just the tools. And that's how we should leverage security. We have a discipline of security and we use technology. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are just technical, don't necessarily understand the fundamentals of security, of what actually makes it less likely for you to be breached. And I worked with, and I think a lot of this applying of security is almost more like a reaction than a solution. I compared to, you go to a hotel and you check in and the hallways and your hotel room is just full of rat traps with dead rats in them. And you go to reception, it's like, I'm not staying here. This is a terrible hotel. You have rat traps everywhere. This is the worst hotel I've ever been in. And the receptionist looks at you confused, like, how can the other hotels be better if they didn't even have rat traps? We know the other hotels didn't need rat traps because they had better hygiene. And that's a little bit of the reaction to that we're having with cybersecurity, implementing all these tools. Is no, actually, you need to fix your IT maturity, your business process, and have fewer things that can go wrong. And I remember working with some insurance underwriters for cybersecurity, and we found that organizations that spent more time maturing IT process were 6 times less likely to be breached than the people spending the same amount of resource on cybersecurity tools. Ignoring the foundations, but lots of security actually made them significantly less secure than organizations who spend far less on security but built good foundations.
that's big. That's 6 times, you said, right? So in that scenario, maybe can you share like an example or two what you mean by IT process, on which process could be better?
It can be evenly basic IT management is a big one. Most organizations are not really able to track, where laptops are, deploy software effectively, configure things properly. Most of them don't have configuration standards. Patching is a huge issue still. It's ridiculous. Like you can patch, the US Air Force patched WannaCry across, I think it was 750,000 endpoints in, I want to say 38 minutes. Some of these were in the back of trucks in Afghanistan on satellite connections, and they managed to do it, right? So it's absolutely possible. I think, identity and access management, defining roles, just going through what's the HR process, what permissions should a job role have, how do we exchange document, it can be really anything. Um, a big part of what's neglected is like applications, for example. So very often like Salesforce implementations, loads of wrong permissions, not really sure how it works, not configured quite properly, lots of users with excessive permissions. Um, and security teams don't really look at that. It's an application. It's not really security's fault. Well, I think a security team should really systematically go through. It's not about doing cybersecurity or playing with cybersecurity tools. There's a small, security operations part to security. But primarily where you're going to get most of your value is go talk to everyone in every department, every role. What is it they need to achieve, and figure out how you achieve that in such a way that introduces the least risk possible. And then whatever risk still remains, because there's always some risk remaining, at least you know about it. Because not once in the 100+ breaches that I've investigated was the cause of the breach on the risk register. It's a little bit self-fulfilling because if it wasn't a risk register, you might have put more focus on it. But the fact is you had a lot of risks that you didn't know about. And there's that, and that was what made, when I was doing the auditing for the law firm, that's what made organizations negligent, because these, they'd get breached through a finance application, for example, and you'd ask the security team, have you gone through the finance systems? And they would say no. And you're like, okay, look, I've been a CISO. It takes time to go through a business. But then you ask them when they were planning on doing so. And they just went blank. Like, well, that's finance. Why would we? So, well, it's part of the business that you're supposed to be securing. Yeah. And again, just with the days that we spent together, I started seeing about, the same thing with, that's all very structured, very IT like. But then you have all this unstructured data that almost follows the business process more than the actual IT framework. It just kind of goes where it wants to go. And it highlights the importance of understanding the business process to know where your data is going. And when I was looking at AvePoint, which was my first experience, it was very much like, hey, this really helps me find that. And then I can pull the string and trace it back and address my process issues that allowed that data to be found there in the first place. And I thought that was really interesting. And definitely in the kind of start of the year, I want to focus a bit more on that. It's definitely something I want to add to the consulting side.
Yeah, especially, I mean, imagine with the growth of AI, more data will be created, right? And while one may say, well, it's AI generating. Well, no, people are still, in this case, giving the prompts, giving the direction, and all of these things will be created. So it's just going to be more important to really understand where these things sits and the business value it provides or not, and what the risks are if it gets breached, right?
You're going to have a higher likelihood of something going somewhere anyway. So you need that periodic check of find the data. But, it also helps you define the guardrails for your AIs, and like, hey, we have this doing that and this. Oh, that should be two separate LLMs because obviously data is crossing over. We've only found that out because, hey, that data was here, it came from there, and now it's here, which means there was crossover. So we actually need to separate these LLMs from these two different groups.
With AI proliferating, for our listeners, how should they think about their security strategies to evolve, in addition to certainly, looking at the source, figuring out how to make their business much more secure and their processes better? What are some thoughts or tips you would offer to make sure they keep up with all these changes?
I would say, I think the biggest problem I see with AI is people think of it as a thing upon itself, and it's not. It's extra resource. In cybersecurity, you hear a lot about AI as in, the attackers will accelerate things, and they absolutely will. The fact is, the attackers probably have a massive backlog. There's so many vulnerabilities. There was a great statistic by Arctic Wolf that I use, which is more than 99% of the breaches, and we're talking 100% minus, NSA and Mossad. More than 99% of breaches involve a known vulnerability with an available fix, and more than 60% of the time, the fix had been available for a year and a half or more. Like that's how bad we are at patching our hole.
Well, this goes back to the fundamentals, right? Like IT processes. Yeah.
Yeah, like why are you unable to patch? It's like, oh, because we can't patch during production. Okay, why didn't you not plan for that? Toyota always has the why, and you why, but why, but why, but why, and eventually you get some real answers. And anyway, all this to say, there's a lot of vulnerabilities out there, and the attackers probably have a backlog waiting to exploit it, and the AIs will help them accelerate. It'll help them find the pathways and the holes. And unfortunately, I think security is being tooted. All of the cybersecurity, AI-powered cybersecurity tools are kind of being used as, you have these holes. You basically have this goal that the attackers are looking at to exploiting or scoring in, and the AI is adding more goalies, but it's not taking away the goal, which is what we should be doing. And I think your solution is actually the best use of AI for that. It's the AI can go and find the data, so I can find the underlying cause. Fixing the underlying cause is not something AI is going to do, but AI will help you find symptoms that you can then trace back. And that's the most powerful thing, because if you address the root causes, you only need to fix it once. You always hear this talk in cybersecurity, oh, we have to be right 1,000,000 times. We can never be wrong even once. Yeah, but the flip side of that is that if you actually fixed the vulnerability, instead of just standing in front of it trying to mitigate all the threats, you only need to fix it once, and the next billion attacks will be unsuccessful because you've actually fixed the underlying issue. But we have a bit of kind of a mentality and silo issue. Very often people in security are like, yeah, you explain it to them and they get it. Yeah, but I'm, in this IT security function, I can't change how HR works or how engineering works or how IT operation works. And I always tell CISOs, like, if you cannot do this, this is your very first job. You need to get, some straight like mandate signed off where you have the organizational structure and authority to do this. And I've been in roles where I spent probably the better part of a year getting like a 12-page mandate/strategy document signed off by the board. But in the following year, I got about 10 times more done because I now had the authority to actually do and make lasting changes, not just firefight forever, 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 but actually make improvements so that when I step back, things are secure. I remember, I think it was Patreon. I can't remember who it was exactly, but they laid off their whole security team, and people on LinkedIn like freaked out. Oh, now they have no security at all. And it's like, if removing a security team that's been there for 5 years means their security goes to zero, doesn't that mean they haven't fixed anything? But that is unfortunately the nature of most security functions. We're just fighting fires all the time, and we really need to stop playing whack-a-mole and actually fix, improve the IT infrastructure and process so you don't have these issues anymore.
I think this is one of the areas, part of the mindset shift that has to change, right? Because we see this in IT itself. For example, people still have this very on-prem, using technical terms, very on-prem mindset. Greg takes care of infrastructure security. He doesn't do application level security, right? There's another person doing application or another team. So it's this very siloed mindset and not thinking holistically. So that's one that has to change. But at the same time, to your point, security should be everyone's responsibility, because at least here at AvePoint internally, we say security is spelled with you and I.
I like that. That's clever. I think it's more about, bringing in a security mindset, because the people themselves, they know what their business process is. They know what they need to do. And most of the time, they really value their data. You go talk to organizations and individual departments, whether it's finance or sales, or they value their data. They don't want someone to get their customer logs or their contract information or their intellectual property or the project they've been working on. So they're quite invested in that, but they don't necessarily have the mindset where they understand how attackers work in security. And unfortunately, we blame the users a lot, but we don't necessarily create the processes through which they can work effectively and securely. And I think those two together are very important, because if you don't allow them to work effectively, and I've seen this where, like in research environments where the IT that was provided to researchers simply wasn't fit for purpose for what they needed. So they circumvent it constantly. And that's a huge issue. Whereas if you provide IT that's fit for purpose for them and they can do what they need to do, then you can control the security context around it. But until you actually get the information from them of how they work, you can't do that. And I think the data, ultimately it's about the data, right? All these systems are there for the data. And I think that the data really tells you a lot about the business process and obviously the IT processes that allow that data to move around. And it allows you to make some really, really informed decisions on how to change process and mature your organization from a security, but I think also an efficiency standpoint.
Well, Greg, we can keep going on and on here, but in the interest of your time and our listeners, before we wrap up, can you share, a couple tips, 1 to 3 advice for business leaders, especially in 2026 and beyond, on how can they be better, how can make sure that they have this security mindset for their organization?
I think the biggest thing I tell people, and this has been my biggest epiphany, is think of security as a quality issue. We've unfortunately evolved to this point where security is a separate silo and it's something we put on top. It doesn't work that way. Security, or the outcome of security, the not being breached and not having the vulnerabilities in the first place, comes from building everything you do very well, whether it's software, systems, your process, how you share, how you communicate, from doing those things well. So when you see a security issue, every time you fix a security issue without understanding how you came to have that security issue is an opportunity lost, because that security issue is a manifestation, a symptom of something else more fundamental. So definitely ask yourselves why these things are happening, and then start addressing them. And obviously prioritize, try to do some financial modeling. And I would suggest people look into lean thinking, look into Six Sigma, and start applying those processes to how you do business process, IT process, infrastructure, and you'll gradually build a more solid, efficient, agile, and secure organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Until the next time. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
That wraps up today's episode. A huge thank you to Greg for the much needed refresher to how we think about cybersecurity. He reminded us that resilience isn't built by adding more dashboards or tools. It comes from strong processes, solid IT foundations, and treating security as a quality priority across the organization. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.
Shift Happens Podcast.